So basically what I'm going to be talking about is how to take a transmission out of a truck, like a manual transmission out of a 4x4 truck. The reason I'm doing it is because it's all about saving money. You don't have to pay a mechanic for labor, stuff like that. First thing you want to do is you want to really make sure that the truck is cold. You don't want to do it warm because then you burn yourself. Pretty self-explanatory. Next thing you want to do is you want to spray the bolts with lubricant. Make sure they come out easy. It's a lot easier to do when all the rust and stuff that's built up on the bolts is broken loose with all the lubricant. You want to acquire an entire tool set as well, just because if you don't have tools, then you can't really do the entire job. You want to make sure the truck's in neutral. If it's not neutral, then the transmission's not going to slide out as easy. Yeah, pretty much, because then also the shifter's not going to come out because the shifter's stuck in gear. Not going to be able to pull it out of the actual transmission itself. The rear drive shaft bolts, there's usually 4 bolts. They're star heads, and make sure they're well lubricated before you do it. You want to put a jack stand under it to make sure the drive shaft doesn't actually fall. Once you remove the bolts, the drive shaft has a little lip on it and it'll actually stay in place. But you really want to, once you remove the bolts, you want to shake it kind of and then like slide it backwards and up and out, and then set it on a jack stand, make sure it doesn't fall, and you don't want to just land on the ground. Front drive shaft the same way. Remove the bolts, lift it up, put it on a jack. Some of them will have a cross member that they'll sit on. Just leave it on the cross member until you're actually ready to pull the actual transmission, because that cross member helps hold the transmission up in there. Again, with the jacks, make sure the jacks are under the drive shaft so they're not laying on the ground. Also, make sure there's a jack under the transmission itself. Daddy, quit. Make sure there's a jack under the transmission itself, so then when you pull the bolts off the transmission or the cross member, that the transmission doesn't fall out. You want to disconnect both batteries because there are wire connections that go to the transmission, and you don't want them to short out. Also, with the starter, once you pull the starter off, you don't want to shock yourself or create a short, so you disconnect the batteries and there's no high power to the truck at all. With the starter, there's usually 3 or 4 bolts, sometimes there's 2, it all depends on the truck. Just take the bolts out, slide it straight out, and then you can actually set it on a sway bar. That's usually on the front end. You set it on there if you don't want to disconnect the wires, or if you want to just disconnect the wires, pull it straight out, it's fine. Transmission lines, those are usually just connected to the side of the transmission. Slave cylinder, just grab it, twist it. You want to do a 90-degree. You actually want to grab it, push it in, twist it, and pull it out. Simple, real simple thing. The shifter itself, there's usually just 5 bolts on top of it. They're usually Allen heads. Take them out, pull it straight up. Make sure it's in neutral again, otherwise it won't come out. Electrical connections, just pop out. Manual transmission is usually 3 or 4, depending on how new it is, maybe 5. Some older models there might not be any at all. The cross member, like I said, that actually helps hold the transmission up, so you want to jack it up, make sure there's a transmission jack under it, and then put a jack behind it at the very end of the transmission, and then you can pull the cross member out. Transmission bolts themselves, make sure they're well lubricated, otherwise you'll strip them out. And if you don't do that, there's not really a good way to get the actual bolts themselves out of the transmission. Otherwise you'll have to drill and tab them, and you usually have to go to a shop for that. Make sure the jack's pretty level with where it was sitting before you took anything apart, and then make sure there's a jack stand at the back of it, make sure it slides out easily. The input shaft, there's an input shaft that goes into the transmission, coming from the motor itself, coming from the transmission going into the motor itself. And to pull the actual transmission out, you're going to have to shift the whole transmission straight back and then drop it down to get the input shaft off the splines and pull it out. And then the next real step is just to slide out the transmission drop it down, and then pull it out from under the truck.